families there as well. Our traditional spaces and places and times of works changed quite dramatically, and they were taken away from us in yeah, a very dramatic fashion. And it's still a bit unclear about how we're going to get back to them and when we're going to get back to them. But as we do, I think in the short to medium term, it's going to be in quite different contexts and at different times. And time is always an issue in educational development. There's just never enough time to do everything, is there? There's never enough time to do that new thing in the VLE, to integrate more learning, active learning, peer assessment, whatever. But over the past 3 months, people have had to do all sorts of things they've never done before and find the time to do that, particularly around using technology. And they're doing all sorts of things that they just never had the time to do before. And that's moving into new and maybe not so new spaces and places for a lot of people. Now, one of the things I've been doing during lockdown, with some of my time, is I've been listening to a lot more audio and podcasts. One of the best things I heard recently was a play called Adventures with the Painted People by David Gregg, and it's part of a series called Culture in Quarantine by the BBC. And it's set in Roman times, around about the incursion in Scotland, set in Kenmore, and it's basically a two-hander between the local witch Ethne and a Roman official and want-to-be poet Lucius. And basically it's a two-hander, and it's really about the kind of clash between the different cultures. And one of the things that strikes Ethne about the Romans is their obsession with straight lines. And quite early on in the play, she said, well, the world's not straight, it wiggles. Now that really resonated with me, because I thought, my goodness, how wiggly is our world just now? And as Lucius tries to explain history to Ethne, he draws a line, a timeline marking events. Now this baffles Ethne, and she draws her response. And she says, time looks like this. And Lucius responds, equally baffled, but that's an asterisk. And then she replies, everything that has ever been leads inevitably to one place, here and now. Now that little exchange has really stuck with me, because I don't know about you, but my conceptions of time have become much more fluid in the last 3 months. Things I thought I was going to be doing have had to move backwards and forwards. I'm moving around between space. March seems like 3 years ago, not just 3 months. And so as we go forward, I think we really need to give more serious consideration to our notions of time and move away from our straight lines of the default 1 hour allocated teaching space of the dominant 9 to 5. Now, if we were witches like Ethne, we'd be able to fly over mountains, to dive and swim through the rivers to do that. But as we're not, we're probably going to need a bit of technology to help us understand the intersection between time, space and place, both physical and digital. And most importantly, help us focus on people and supporting and sustaining our emerging hybrid learning communities. I don't think we want to get too obsessed with technology, but I do think we need to take more time to reflect on what's actually happening just now and re-articulate what the student experience is. But the straight lines won't go away. They won't be kept at bay. The ed tech companies, the bigger forces that surround us, that fund us, they like straight lines. They don't want the wiggles. They can't cope with that. So as we're going forward, I think we need to share a lot of the research that's happening and share that between us. And so that we're creating our own narratives, our sense of what is normal. We need to work together much, much more closely to do that and share everything that we're learning, share that with us and with the rest of society as well. So I would say, just my plea at the end of my 5 minutes is, let's look to the asterisks and not to the straight line, to find new ways to share our stories, to explore maybe new desire paths or elephant trails between the different physical and digital spaces that we're using just now, and focus on our communities and finding the ways that lead us all to the here and now, wherever and whenever that may be. Thank you very much.
Perfect timing, Sheila, perfect timing. Just a quick question. How have students' conceptions of time changed, do you think?
I think they're probably like everybody else. We're just kind of scrambling around, seeing how things have changed a bit, you know, in terms of doing things at a different pace, not being in the same places you are. I'm sure like everybody, it kind of speeds up and slows down. So I don't really know. Again, I need to find out more stories about that, because I'm not teaching just now, so I don't have any students that I can, you know, give a story to. But I'm sure that lots of our participants are doing that and are having lots of discussions with their students about that just now.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Anybody got any questions or comments about that, put them in the chat and we'll come back to them later on. But I'm sure that Laurie Phipps will be able to provide us with a complete answer to everything. And Laurie, your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Peter. And I have the answers to absolutely nothing. So I've been involved with SEDA for a long time. And I think one of the privileges that I've had is that I've worked in learning technology and staff and educational development for a few years now. So I'm hoping that some of the things that I say will have resonance in both communities. It's already been said today, but we can't ignore the elephant in the room, and that's what we've been going through in the last few months. You know, it's a massive upheaval in higher education. What we learn from it, what we take forward, is going to be key in meeting any challenge across higher education in the next 10 years. And I think that the ramifications for staff and educational development and for learning technology is going to last way beyond that. We just can't know. It's one of those unknowns, I guess. So it's a time to reflect for me. It's a time to start making sure that we're capturing the voices during this particular time as well. I've been lucky over the last few months to be able to do research with my GIST colleagues and with Donna Lanclow, who I saw in the room today. We've been looking at the experiences of academic staff and the experiences of leaders in teaching and research during the pandemic. And that work's been building on the research that we did and published in 2019, which was a contextual inquiry into teaching practices and the implications for the use of technology. I'll put the link for that work and the paper in the chat. The research that we've done during the pandemic has highlighted a lot of really interesting practices that have started to come through. A lot of stresses, a lot of pressures that academics are feeling. And it's also highlighted for me, and whilst we haven't been able to interview students at the moment, it has highlighted that academics have got a deep care for students. I'm going to touch on a couple of other insights for the rest of the few minutes that I have. But before I do that, I also want to draw attention to the work of Richard Watermeyer, Tom Crick, Catherine Knight, and Janet Goodall. They've published a paper of their findings during the pandemic as well. And they've done quite large qualitative surveys of academic staff. And their paper, COVID-19 and the Digital Disruption in UK Universities, Afflictions and Affordances of Emergency Online Migration, is really good. I want to touch on that because I've not been shy in calling out that I don't think we've pivoted to online. There's a lot of commentators out there that have said things like, oh, we've pivoted to online, it's great. And the phrasing and the rhetoric around that, hey, it's an online pivot, actually hides a lot of the hard work that people have had to do. And that's both learning technologists and staff and educational developers involved in digital learning. But mostly we've had to focus on the mind shift of academics. We've had to embrace new practices to ensure that we can actually deliver a quality experience for students. I totally agree with Richard, Tom, Catherine, and Janet's paper. It was an emergency online migration. It wasn't strategic, very far from simple. So that's one of the backdrops to the research that we've been doing. I'm going to focus on two other areas. The first insight that we developed from our research will be unsurprising to many of you. Academics are not struggling with providing content. They have sources of content and they have tools for providing content to students. The struggle that they face comes in finding help in how to engage students in online spaces. Content has lost its primary place of importance when we live in an age of information abundance, but learning is collaborative and social. So the value in education is coming through engagement and experience. And Dave Cormier at the University of Windsor has written loads about this. So if we accept that that's the case and that it's all about the engagement and the experience, we need to look at our staff development programs and identify if they are focusing on the affordances that digital bring in that regard. And I know that many still think of learning technology as being an add-on. I know there's some really good programs out there, but I still see PG certs and I still see lots of programs in the field that are basically bringing the learning technologists in as an add-on to say, oh, and by the way, here's the virtual learning environment. And that's the other thing about that. We need to flip it. because we need to start saying, if content is something that is not problematic, do the tools that we have actually force us into content transmission? So are they fit for purpose for how students want to engage with education? Or are they forcing academics into that content transmission style of teaching?
Thank you.
The second thing I just wanted to...
You've got one sentence left, sir. You've run out of time.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I'm going to leave
a quick sentence, yeah?
Yeah, I want people to start thinking about what guidance and help look like. Centres for Teaching and Learning are fantastic at providing really good guidance, really good frameworks. But what we found is that academics are really good at bookmarking them and saying they look like quality. But what they really need is help in the moment, that just-in-time help that gets them to that point where they can provide the experience for the students.
Yeah. So what staff development would you introduce if you had power across HE tomorrow?
I would merge all learning technology and academic development units and make them talk to each other a lot more than they perhaps do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Please keep putting stuff in the chat box, folks, and we will come back to it later. Hand over now to David Walker, who runs a centre and is obviously doing exactly what Laurie is telling us to do. David, your 5 minutes starts now.
Hi everyone. So I'm going to build on what you've just heard so beautifully from Sheila and also from Laurie, and I love some of the language that we've used so far. So Sheila's talked about time and talked about wiggles, and Laurie's talked about some of the important student voices and staff voices that he's been capturing. I want to talk about context because as Peter has just said, I'm working in a role where I am leading a unit with learning technologists and academic developers who work alongside each other, and I'm also taking a coordinating role for our preparations for the new academic year at an institutional level. So I'm looking at things through a slightly different lens. So I want to talk about context and how we understand context, because what we have seen in the last few months, indeed the last few weeks, is multiple wiggles and wriggles as the landscape around us has changed dramatically. So I put it to you that the context that we are operating in now is one that is extremely precarious. We see enormous levels of uncertainty, complexity, and legitimate concern among our staff, concern among our students, and that's generated by the uncertainty we face now, but also in the future. So the landscape around us has shifted and is going to continue to shift dramatically. But from this, I think there's huge opportunities for educational developers and learning technologists to operate in this space as third space professionals. What I think is important for us all to recognize through the lens of an institution is that COVID has represented an existential threat to many institutions, but on the positive side, is also forcing us to address some deep-rooted issues related to pedagogy, equality, and sustainability. When we start to think about the context we're operating in, though, at an institutional level, it's really, really crucial as practitioners in these spaces that we start to harness the evidence and the data that we have around us. Now, this could be the voices that Laurie was alluding to just moments ago, but what I think is really important that we also stay abreast of some of the sectoral and regulatory environment that's around us too. So for those of you who are in institutions here in the UK or in England, you will know that we are regulated by the Office for Students. So they have been very clear to us on their expectations for what they see in the time ahead. We've moved away from this period, and I agree completely with what Laurie said about emergency remote migration to a different context again. We can no longer fall back on some of the very legitimate arguments we'd make for the dramatic changes that people made in such a short space of time. It was an absolutely phenomenal effort. But what we provide in September has to be much more considered. It has to be much more meaningful. And there is expectations on us, particularly in England, regarding the communication to students about the education that they will expect, what we will provide, what forms will teaching methods take, what will it look like. We've also been told that we need to ensure we maintain student and consumer protection. So that has to be something that we be mindful of as our practitioners as well. More broadly, we've also got the relevance of the QA and also professional, statutory and regulatory bodies as well. On top of that, we've got emerging legislation related to web accessibility, and something that's always been there but is sometimes overlooked is the importance of the Equality Act in ensuring inclusion and access for our students. So what I'm putting to you is that as we move forward into this very uncertain period that faces us, our academic colleagues will need this support. It will need to be help. It needs to move beyond guidance. And to do this properly, we need to be, as developers, as technologists, aware of some of these big picture issues that are facing institutions so that we can ensure that our staff are putting together a really excellent experience for our students, but one that also is mindful of the requirements that face our institutions. Thinking about some of the opportunities that we see, I draw back to something that Sheila and I wrote a number of years ago. We talked about the development of a new sort of role within institutions of a digital pedagogue. And we talked about how these individuals needing to skillfully traverse through both pedagogical and technological domains. And I think this time has been long in its coming. So hopefully we will see opportunities for educational developers and technologists to work closely on some of the challenges that we face in the days and weeks and months ahead. I think that they are in the optimal space, that third space that many of them operate to realize positive change, because they understand the disciplinary challenges we are operating in. And those technologists and developers who engage with data, who harness evidence, who maintain active connection in professional networks are going to be able to do so much more effectively than those who do not.
Thank you, David. Lots of stuff coming out in the chat box about the relationship between learning technologists and education developers. How do you see that developing in future?
I think it's something that is a really challenging artificial divide. And I think there's a real danger if we start to get bounded by our identities in terms of being technologists and developers, we somehow become lacking in both areas. In the needs of our institutions is that we have individuals who are confident, critical users of digital technologies. They're pedagogically informed, but they're digitally confident as well. So whether these roles start to converge in the future, I think is something that we might see. I think some of the old divides are perhaps not particularly useful as we move into what will be a different future for us all.
Thank you, David. Okay, we now move on to Sue Beckingham, who most of you will know already, to give us a rather different perspective from someone who's really at the sharp end in terms of teaching students. Okay, Sue, your 5 minutes starts now.
So my perspective is looking at the student voice and the importance of the student voice. I'm going to start with a quote from Gardibo and Wigberg that says, "If there's to be a single important structural change during the coming decades, it is the changing role of students who are given more room in defining and contributing to higher education." And I think there's two ways to look at this. One of them is to actually listen, find ways to listen to the students' personal stories. Certainly from my perspective, I work at Sheffield Hallam University, which is widening participation university. There are students there, as there are in many universities, that are parents. They need to have part-time jobs to be able to continue their education. They may be carers. There's digital poverty. Certainly in the last few weeks before undergrad term finished, it was quite clear that not all students had equal access to technology. Digital poverty is something that we really need to recognise. I had a student in tears telling me, "I'm trying to finish my assignments on my mobile phone because I don't have a laptop." And they rely on coming into the library to use the facilities. So in terms of preparing our students in the next coming semester in the new academic year, we need to be listening to their stories and understand that they may not have spaces to learn because they're at home with their siblings, family, in a small environment. You know, they don't necessarily have a study or a place to go to. There's the access to learning, having, you know, a reliable Wi-Fi internet connection to actually get online. there's the motivation to learn because they're isolated, the students are away from the peers. How can we ensure that they keep in touch with each other and we build that community so they have that re-energized sense of belonging? So these are things we need to kind of help to build in. And some students will do that quite naturally, but there's the ones that are perhaps the shyer, the introvert, the quieter ones that might not. And having time to learn. It might not be at the timetabled scheduled session that you're thinking you're going to have your synchronous online organized session. We need to be mindful that that needs to be recorded and the students can access it at different times. So unless we talk to our students, we don't really know what these stories are. And one of the things I've done over the years prior to COVID is to get the students to do about me videos and have reflective diaries. So whether that's using any portfolio system, we use Pebblepad, but it is quite interesting to see the stories that come out from the students. So we get to know them. So that's one aspect. The other is working with students as partners, which I'm a really big advocate of and have been doing that for quite some years now with the students. So I've had a group where we were looking specifically at social media for learning, because that's my area of interest. We'd had a recent conference at the university. So I suggested to the students that attended that, do you want to be part of a special interest group? And he says, yeah, that sounds great. But they rebranded themselves. They came up with this term SMASH, which is Social Media for Academic Studies at Hallam. But what was really interesting is how over the 4 years I've had this group, and it's been different students, how they've contributed and changed my mind about certain approaches to things that I would incorporate into learning and teaching using technology. And the students then worked with other students and academics within our area. So we've had workshops, they've created resources, they've written blog posts, and they've been able to speak at conferences. So they've helped to tell other people outside of the institution. And I think the important thing there is, one, we can learn a lot from the students as educators. Also, it's really good and empowering for those students to contribute to the story as well. And, you know, it's really important, any students as partners initiative, that they get recognition and get something out of it themselves. Okay. Peter, you're on silent.
Thank you for that. You finished 30 seconds early, so you took me by surprise. Things coming out of the chat box about student and inequities. I wondered whether you had any views as to how universities should tackle that particular problem.
Inequities, you know, it's quite a broad thing to consider there. You know, if we're looking at technology and access, then, you know, we sent out a survey to our students. We did call upon a hardship fund, and we've been able to help students that have needed support with getting a laptop. It's something we're considering for students coming into the institution when they come back in September, assuming we are still in that stage where we can have students in at a safe distance. But, you know, priority should be given to the students that actually need access to the facilities, you know, primarily the Wi-Fi and laptops to actually be able to do their learning, you know, because even if we're doing the majority of it online, if they don't get access to that, then obviously they're marginalised. Was there anything else specific that anybody wanted to ask?
There's particularly about international comment there coming out about international students, particularly concerned about online. I don't know whether you've got experience of that one.
Well, we've talked about this. I mean, the international students, you know, they want to come to the UK because they want the whole experience. You know, they want to be able to meet other students. They want to be involved in activities outside of teaching time. They want that taught experience. And, you know, we're in this unusual circumstance that, you know, if it's all going to be online, is it worth coming? Because actually they could do that at home, assuming they've got access to the internet and the devices to do so. So it's a really tricky one. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to keep reminding all of our students that, you know, this isn't our choice to be online. We're doing it because of the situation. And, you know, for the majority of us at least, you know, we're not planning to be distance learning organisations. But, you know, we're just going to do the best that we possibly can. And, you know, the more that we can sort of share those experiences and concerns, the more chance that we have to try and resolve what we can resolve.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. I'm sure we'll come back to that perhaps in the discussion later. Lots of interesting stuff coming out of the chat box, and also lots of interesting links, folks, for everyone to pursue. Okay, Teresa McKinnon is our final contributor for the 5-minute slots. And Teresa, your 5 minutes starts now.
Thank you, Peter. I'm hoping you're also going to allow me the moment to share my screen. I've just shared a link in the chat, and that's because I'm an open educator and I rather like to share things as I go. And of course, it's kind of useful as well to be adding a little bit more context so that you can see a little bit more about the context that I'm working in. So let's just take a moment, because I've been totally blown away listening to the earlier panelists at just how much synergy there is between what they're saying and what I'm about to say. But I come at this very much from a language learning perspective, from the field of languages. And if we're looking at challenges, well, you know, we have huge challenges. We've all been very much faced with them through this time, but they've been there for quite some time. And if I share this image, which I think you'll be familiar with, the global sustainability goals, the sustainable development goals, and perhaps ask you to look down column number 4, because that's particularly the area that I think language contributes to. Quality education, reducing inequalities.
Teresa, could you go on to screen show, because at the moment you've will it work? Okay,
let me just stop that share. I am screen sharing, but for some reason it didn't pick up that.
Through.
Okay, let's try that.
The clock has stopped.
Let's try it this way around. Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
No.
Are you now seeing my screen?
No, but oh yes.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah,
yes,
good.
Yes.
It is. Yeah,
Thanks
I did get the message to say I was screen sharing last time, but obviously it didn't. So, to recap, just the global sustainable development goals. Goal 4: quality education. How are you offering a quality education if you're not offering the opportunity to understand your world? And how do you do that if you don't offer language learning as a possibility? How do you reduce inequalities if you don't understand where the inequalities are? And if your only access to information comes from your own nation, which may not fully reflect the inequalities that exist? And how do you strive for peace, justice, and strong institutions if, in fact, your language limits your understanding of the world? Interest in language learning has never been so high. It's still in huge demand, but it is problematic. Big problems can't be solved by any one nation. So let me start from the field of language learning. What we try and do in language learning is to create intercultural communicative competence, understanding of how others see our world and how they see their own world. So there's a complexity here that includes soft skills, being able to put yourself into someone else's shoes. Language acquisition is very complex. For most of us, we acquired our first language before the age of 5 and probably therefore don't really remember very much of that process. But if you go through the language learning in later life, second language learning or additional language learning, the chances are that your time to acquire skills, and come back to Sheila here, will be limited. And in order to get quality provision, you will probably require some form of human mediation, a guide who's been on that same language learning journey. Distance and blended learning requires new skills. There are huge opportunities here, but huge, huge challenges. Experiential learning can be transformative. Actually experiencing what it's like to live in another culture, as has been alluded to just now, is an enormously important way of acquiring language skills and being able to empathize with other communities. The field of language learning has actually been very much involved with digital practices for the past 30 years. But that's not to say that all language teachers are familiar with use of technology. That really isn't the case. So I'm also going to draw your attention to the sentence at the bottom of this slide. Language provision is constantly under threat. I've been teaching in language acquisition for the past 30 years. Opportunities to reduce language provision are frequent, and often we are the target of ways of simplifying delivery because what we do is very complex. We're also very much victims of a commodification culture. So where are the opportunities post-COVID? Now, I've just divided these into two audiences, particularly for practitioners. There are huge opportunities if you're a language educator to make use of learning technology to reach out and connect your students and connect them with the rest of the world when they perhaps cannot at the moment be physically mobile. I shall point particularly to virtual exchange. This is a multimodal, multi-channel communication. We are communication experts, therefore we need to be familiar with the different channels that are available. There are so many opportunities. Fortunately for us in the UK, there are many practical communities as well that you can connect to as a practitioner. The Association of University Language Centres, for example, Eurocool, and the Specialist Association for Learning Technology. You don't have to do everything in one go, but you do have to think seriously about the skills that you have and apply them to these new channels. Use your critical skills in order to build your critical digital literacy. Take ownership of the space that you have in the digital realm, understand the differences and the challenges, and think about who is excluded from these spaces. For learning technologists who often may find themselves supporting linguists and perhaps are less familiar maybe with the sort of challenges that we have, we really, really need you to listen actively to our needs. Over the past 30 years, I've seen technologies come and go because they're too niche, they're considered too niche. The activities that we do depend on interaction. Interaction is not the default position for a lot of university teaching. We don't need your solutionism. We need you to listen and engage effectively with us. We need you to encourage our practitioners to develop their experiences of using digital technologies. There are lots and lots of possibilities. I mentioned virtual exchange. Those of you who follow me on Twitter will know all about the investments that have been made there by the Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange Initiative over the last few years. We also need you to be brave and honest and to stand up for the voices of those of us working within languages, because some of the things that we are asked to do with technology are not the best solutions for our students. And we need you to help to support our core values.
Okay, Teresa, I need
so
to cut
finally,
you off.
yeah, this is my final slide. My final slide.
One final sentence.
Absolutely. The challenges are really so great that success can only come from effective collaboration. Way too much of that collaboration takes place above the waterline. We need you to go below the waterline. Open practice can really contribute to building the trust that's needed for successful collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Lovely place to end. Okay, so those are our 5 contributors. We're now going to throw various things at them from the chat box, and I'll be picking out some themes. And if all the contributors would like to open their mics so they can chip in as and when. One thing that's been coming out in the last few minutes on the chat box is about the higher education experience and how do we now describe the higher education experience? How will we describe the higher education experience to students? And Sheila is nodding her head, so she can start. How would you describe the higher education experience?
Damn my nodding head. No, seriously, I think that that's something that didn't quite come out in my talk, but I've been thinking about this a lot. We need to be working that out with the students. We can't just be delivering things just now. The student experience is fundamentally changing, and it's going to be quite different, particularly for the next semester, the next academic term. So we can't try to pretend that it's going to be the same, and we need to work with students, and we need to take a bit of time to get them comfortable in our spaces and their spaces, being very mindful of all the things that Sue said about digital poverty and the inequalities. We can't just assume that everyone's going to have access to technology at the time that suits us in the institution. So it really needs to be a joint effort. We have to be talking to our students. We have to rethink how we're evaluating, and we have to be doing it. We can't just use our old, module evaluation forms. We need to be doing that much more often and working out with the students, well, what does work for you when you're doing that kind of balance between synchronous and asynchronous activities? What are the times that suit you, and try to work together, and then together to kind of re-articulate what the student experience is, because the strongest advocates for higher education are going to be our students. And if we can get them to be involved in that process of articulating what a student means what it means to be a student in this kind of post-COVID world, then hopefully we can give them a positive experience because we're working with them. But we have to work with them. We don't know. None of us know. And if we think we do, we're lying. And if we just buy into a solution that tells us we know, then I think we're in big trouble.
Okay. Anybody else want to offer a half penneth on that one?
I think I would just dive in and say that we have to bear in mind that learning just doesn't happen in institutions. Learning happens everywhere, and it's part of our responsibility as practitioners to help students understand where they learn best and the spaces that they learn best, and some of those may be informal spaces. So I think as earlier panelists have said, it's important that we help students navigate informal as well as formal spaces.
How about the question of cooperation, collaboration, which is where you ended up, Teresa, with that slide, and some comments in the chat box there, particularly one that's just cropped up from Helen Beetham. Everybody using their own apps, their own platforms, and things aren't coming together, both in terms of the agencies and also different universities and students. Does anybody have any resolutions to that? Perhaps Laurie would like to comment on that one.
No, I don't have any resolution. I have no resolution to it. Yeah. But there is an issue, and those, the thing about the platforms and which to support and which ones are legitimate and not legitimate, that also speaks to people's access. It's about, what people can actually do. And as people know, we've been involved in a lot of projects over the years, and, there's an awful lot of people that have developed apps for education that only work on iPhones. Well, you know what? There's a whole load of people that can't afford an iPhone. So yeah, I don't have a solution for it. What I do like is that more and more developers that are building things for the web now are working with open APIs and, are working to open up the ecosystem. But if I'm honest, I don't think there's a single technology. We need to think of the learning experience when it comes to digital as being an ecosystem of lots of different things, and students need to be able to pull those things together themselves. And we keep talking about the student experience as a single thing, and we should be thinking in the plurality of that. The experience of a white middle-class student in England is going to be very different from a student who is not based in the UK, who doesn't have continual internet access. If we want to be a global society in the UK, then we have to stop designing for the same people in the same space. But I'd also like to say that I'm also really concerned about the teaching experience. What work are we doing to think about the different teaching experiences of our staff right now? In the Twitter stream, this came home to me because somebody asked in Twitter, I missed Laurie's quote, I was dealing with a 4-year-old who had to wee. Well, you know what? I'm a white middle-aged male man sitting here, not with no childcare responsibilities. And we have a whole load of staff who've got a whole load of caring responsibilities that are really coming to the front in this current situation. And we need to be thinking about what the teaching experience is, you know, as well as the student experience. And that's been neglected in my mind for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Can I just go back to the student experience just very quickly, and before we diversify onto that, and Teresa might have something as well. I'm not sure whether you wanted to say something, but one of the things about the student experience and coming to university is for students to build new friendships and experiences with other people on the course. So, you know, we need to be thinking about how we can provide them with activities as part of the learning experience. So we bring them together in groups and we give them something, whether it's, you know, problem solving, inquiry based learning approaches, whatever it is that they need to do, and they choose the space to work collaboratively or cooperatively, whichever way you want to look at it, outside of the taught classroom, and then come back and present what they've actually found so that they can build on that. And that happens over weeks rather than, you know, sort of in being one activity. And the second thing is that the university, the student union is attached to the student the university. There are lots of different societies that we need to be signposting the students to, which will continue online. It won't be the same as face-to-face, but they're going to be trying the darndest to be able to keep that going. So, you know, it's making sure that the students know what extra things there are. The extracurricular things is the remote volunteering they can do, and it's that broader umbrella of the student experience that, you know, we could talk for hours, I guess, but yeah, it's not just about the teaching was the point, really.
Teresa, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally support everything that Sue's saying there, but also add to that a sort of an international dimension. One of the things that we've been doing with the Virtual Exchange, Erasmus Plus Virtual Exchange initiative, is training practitioners to collaboratively co-design with their students and with practitioners in other institutional and international settings. So working with North Africa, working with Canada, working with America, working with Russia, working around the world, designing together. And it's at these points that they discover what challenges there really are. It's a really useful experiential learning curve that our practitioners go on during those 5-6 weeks of doing that training, to understand and make visible our normal biases towards the technologies that we usually choose when they're applied in that international context. So I think there's so much more we can be learning from those experiences too.
Another thing that cropped up in the chat box quite a while ago was how, if you like, the nature of teaching and the synchronous versus asynchronous debate, and what is that going to look like? And so my question is, what do you think that's going to look like in the new normal of semester 1 next year? Throw that to David first, I think, because you're preparing for that, aren't you?
A lot of these issues, very valid comments about inequalities coming up in the chat, and I think it's absolutely legitimate. And I think when we think about learning what's most effective, certainly asynchronous approaches are much disparaged in terms of how effective they are at facilitating learning, and indeed addressing some of the technology challenges we're aware that our students have. So something I'm aware of, and I've received pushback on this, I've been an advocate for this as an approach throughout the recent period, and staff have since said to me, but our students are telling us that they really like synchronous contact, they want synchronous contact. But that didn't include the voices of those students who weren't able to engage in that synchronous contact. So I think we need to be mindful of that. Thinking about the synchronous element, though, is interesting, because through the work that we've done with our students, they have said that they've benefited from it, not in the sense of a learning experience, but in an experience connecting with their peers, connecting with others, removing that sense of isolation they felt during this very stressful period of lockdown. So moving forward, I think we need to think about what that balance looks like and how we can meaningfully integrate asynchronous activities with an element of synchronous. I don't think we're going to overcome all these inequality challenges, I think it's really frustrating that it's taken a global pandemic for some people to seem to realize that these issues existed. These are not new issues. These existed for a long time. So I think it's really good that a lens has been put on them. Whether we get solutions to them is another matter.
Okay. Sue, could I ask you to comment on that? Because you've been trying to work out what teaching is going to be like for a generation of colleagues coming up in September.
I think we need to think about a lot more scaffolding. So I'm looking at, which isn't anything new, but sort of getting colleagues in my department, I work in the Department of Computing, to think about pre-session activities. So, you know, whether that's getting the students to read something, to watch an element of the lecture that you would normally deliver, but making that like a bite-sized mini lecture, and maybe a worksheet that they could start to untease some of the ideas, and then having the live session, and we're having to plan for what that might be face-to-face, what that might be online synchronous, and how we can record it so that the activities can be done by students who can't make it in real time. And then following that, having the post-session activities so that students, you know, will go away and work on something, whether it's more reading or practicing or developing a presentation with the peers, whatever that is, so that they've got that marked structure. And if that's done week on week, the students that perhaps we've experienced before when we've asked them to do something prior to a class will start to become better prepared. So in the live session, you know, at the beginning, you can do like little mini quizzes and try and go over it, and you can do a recap. But over the course of time, hopefully they'll get more involved and they'll have that structure. Okay. So they're the kind of things that I'm exploring at the moment. And of course, it's very different in different subject areas. You know, people are struggling to decide what needs to be face-to-face, absolutely, you know. So if you're working in nursing, for example, or art and design, or it's forensics or the networking labs in computing, they need specific things to be able to do their teaching. That's going to be extremely challenging. Whereas there is other things, you know, we can manage to get the content, we'll chunk up the content, we're not going to deliver an hour's lecture in one go, and, you know, getting feedback from the students during those synchronous sessions, giving them little activities, sending them off into groups, breakout rooms if you're using a tool that can do that, so that they can get used to that. But the other element that's kind of come to my mind, I've done a couple of online sessions and had to go in a breakout room, and the first time I did it, it was like, oh my goodness, I wasn't actually quite listening. What am I supposed to be doing in this room with these strangers? So, you know, practicing the things that the students are going to do, so you have some fun things at the beginning to show them this is the expectation of this space or this tool or whatever it is that we want to do. So it's not intimidating. And then when you're actually doing the learning, the tools slide away because they understand what they've got to do there.
Can I just reiterate, you know, and what Sue said there? I think we're going to have, you know, another elephant in the room. You know, Laurie was talking about elephants in the room. It does all come back to time. We really need to give staff time to design and give them time to think about design. And, you know, and I think in the last 3 months, people have done an amazing job. Everyone that's in this webinar today has done an amazing amount of work to get things online and to have that emergency response. But that's had a knock-on effect in terms of marking, extenuating circumstances. People need a break. They need to get their holidays. And we're just going to go straight back in, you know, September. We can't do things the way we were. I think we're going to have to just be, I don't know how we do this, but, you know, maybe to take a step back, think more about kind of some of these, what Sue was saying, you know, like having fun, those digital literacies that we need to get everyone, staff and students, comfortable with technology and the spaces, formal and informal, and how we're going to work, and maybe have less of a kind of a rush on the kind of the academic discipline focused things, but maybe look at some things that are happening. David mentioned context. Well, COVID is a common context for every discipline, for everyone just now. what are things that are happening in the real world just now? What are the data literacy skills that our students need to understand the data that's coming out, or more importantly, not coming out from the UK government just now, who seem to be just kind of, oh, it's over and done with now. We need to be developing really critical, reflective students so that we have a generation that's not going to be lost anymore, that makes the most of the educational opportunities that they can get, if they can get them, and that really can help change things, because we can't go back to where we were. You know, as David said, there's been a spotlight on inequality, and we have to make sure that we are all doing as much as we can to do that. But we need to engage our students and our staff and be realistic about what we can do. It can't be business as normal, and if we think it's going to be business as normal in September, then we're just setting ourselves all up to fail. Sorry, rant over.
Okay.
Sheila, I just want to say that what you said there about a considered approach is crucial here. It is important now that we collectively take a breath. We need to work out how we can approach this together, collectively, because I think some of the factional elements of universities have begun to really manifest now. You know, the narrative of the centre versus the school versus others. You know, this is a real challenge. You know, recruitment figures for institutions are down. Students may not be able to return. We've got this huge, enormous task of how do we prepare these courses to be ready for September, but they need to be ready for September. But if we just start rushing in and start piling things into VLEs, this is not the solution. This is not the way to do it. So I think a collective breath, a rest, and then approach it in a considered, meaningful way is the way to really get a solution to this.
Okay, folks, thanks very much. Good. Laurie, one final comment?
Well, it's about this collective breath. I don't disagree that we need to take a collective breath. And we also spoke about factionalism. What I'm seeing in some institutions, and not all by any means, but the success that people have had in responding to what has been a truly awful time has started to manifest in people telling each other what a great job they've done, and using that in leverage to gain points in their institutions. And actually, I think if we take a breath and look around, we need to be really careful about when we take a breath and say we got that right, who are we actually pushing out of the picture when we do that? Because right now, I know that there are departments in institutions who are patting themselves on the back at the expense of a different department. And so, you know, the professional services in institutions are the ones now that, yes, take a breath, but also come together. You've got to come together as professional services to actually start saying, okay, now we need to have a coherent response from the centre if we're going to go forward. Because there are some units that are looking to increase their you know, as simple as their headcount, just so that they can actually win the pandemic. And we need to be mindful of that, because this is a competitive sport for some people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Many thanks to our contributors. We're nearly at the end, but I can now hand over to Carol Davis, who's co-chair of SEDA, to give us a couple of minutes of a wind up and summary, and give us all the answers. Over to Carol.
Well, yeah, I think more questions rather than answers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just going to briefly summarize and I'll move to some thanks. Sheila, thank you. You put people at the center, time, space, place, digital and physical places. The losses that we have faced, time. The world is not full of straight lines. We have wiggles too. Laurie, I always listen to you with such interest, particularly the provocations about not being self-congratulatory at the expense of others. What can we take from here? The teaching experience, a different teaching experience. That is absolutely crucial. Thank you for sharing your research that you've done with JISC, and also there was much other sharing. And don't forget, we're recording this, making available as well as the chat functions. You said we haven't pivoted, and I think that is true to online in the way that we think. The mind shift of academics, and you know, what does guidance and help look like? Quite different things. And you called for the merge between learning technologists and academic developers in a more coherent way. David Walker, an institutional perspective, the importance of language, context, what it's like to coordinate across a huge institution, precariousness, complexity, uncertainty, synchronous versus asynchronous learning, and how digital poverty feeds into that, shifting landscapes. Come September, careful consideration, but also the spectrum of consumerism rises. Sue, the importance of the student voice, widening participation. Your case studies were stunning, and listening to their stories is what I take. Teresa, language learning perspectives. How are we offering a quality education, intercultural competence and language acquisition for practitioners and learning technologies, the need to ask difficult questions, avoid technologies which are too niche, engagement rather than solutionism. And I love your quote about being brave and honest. And thank you, Virtual Exchange Erasmus Plus. I had not heard of it, and it sounds amazing. In closing, those of you unfamiliar with SEDA, look at our membership packages. We welcome you. We are really important right now. And we'll be in touch with you, telling you more about how you may engage with us. The brilliant, amazing Professor Peter Hartley, always outstanding facilitator. Louise Lockland, working in the back room, making all this possible, our administrator, our contributors to the panel. Yeah, just incredible people. Thank you to all of you who attended, the chat, the generosity. Have a fabulous weekend, and just back to Peter for some closing words.
Okay, just to remember that you can save the chat by using the wee three buttons at the bottom. Some fabulous links there coming out in the chat. One issue that we didn't really get round to was about diversity and inclusivity, and we are thinking about that as perhaps a major theme for a future webinar. There will be more SEDA webinars, and we're very welcome to receive requests from folk as to which themes they could do. So all I've got left to say is thank you for all your contributions, and good afternoon from the Scottish Riviera. And now the obligatory Zoom wave. Thanks, folks. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.